Welcome everybody. This is a GreenKey webinar, and today we're going to discuss improving policing with body camera audio analysis. Hopefully you're at the right place. Myself, just making introductions here. My name is Anthony Tassone. I'm the CEO and founder of GreenKey. On our next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what GreenKey is and what we do, how we structure up data and conversations for folks. I don't have a police background. My background is in algorithmic trading, machine learning. I have a technology and a computer science background. GreenKey is on Wall Street analyzing conversations, but we also analyze 911 phone calls and now body-worn camera for the police. And since I don't have a police background and not knowledgeable about the intricacies of being police, I've asked my friend and advisor, Chief Trevino, to join us today. And just introducing Chief Trevino. And by the way, there's a couple Anthony T's here on the webinar, so I'll go by AT and I'll just call the Chief. Chief was the assistant chief down in San Antonio and just retired this year. He was a police officer for 23 years. He was also in the United States Air Force, retired as a Chief Master Sergeant in 2011. He sits on a number of boards. Honestly, I couldn't fit all of Chief's certifications and experience and background on this slide without really humiliating myself. So we just decided to cut him off right down there at major city chiefs. But he sits on technology committees for Homeland and Major City and Secret Service. And I'll tell you, having met Chief Trevino, I learned about his experience. He spent a lot of time down at the FBI National Academy and the Executive Institute. Chief Trevino also was awarded the Officer of the Year by American Legion. And then also in his career in the United States Air Force, Chief Trevino was awarded the Senior Enlisted Officer of the Year. He's been nominated by the Department of Justice for the Crime Suppression Award. And I'm sure, Chief, I speak for the entire audience. Thank you for your service, both police and military. You are what good police look like.
Thank you, AT. I appreciate it. And, listening to what you're describing, it just all seemed like it was a blur, but it was really everything between my Air Force career, my police career, was really truly a labor of love. It's something that I enjoyed doing day in, day out. And so it's definitely been an adjustment, but I'm still looking for different opportunities to serve.
Chief, one of the reasons we met and we began talking about some of the problems that police and the public community have and how technology can help that. One of the things I learned about you is that you, down in San Antonio, you were a member of the Black Officer Coalition. You were also the president of the Hispanic Police Officer Organization. And you also led the development and the deployment of San Antonio's body-worn camera program, which was a national model. And so it really struck me as, not only you have this large operational background. I mean, you really are a cop's cop, but you also, as becoming a chief, you developed incredible leadership skills and as well as, you've got a technical background, having sat on all of these boards. And it struck me as, you being the ideal person to sort of ask questions of. And I view this webinar as sort of like one of the virtual dinners that we've had. And I'm hoping we just have a sort of a discussion about many of the different topics we talked about in the past. Really looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us, Chief. So just a quick commercial before we get started here. A little bit about my company, GreenKey. We essentially listen to Wall Street phone calls, and we analyze these phone calls and we generate insights. We basically help Wall Street salespeople make more money. And I'm going to try to connect the dots of, how did I get started on Wall Street and building technology for banks and trading firms to, sitting down here with Chief Trevino. And really, it's about analyzing conversations. In 2017, we began to analyze 911 phone calls. And then later, in 2019, we became a Motorola portfolio company. And then in 2020, we began analyzing body-worn camera. And so our GreenKey's background, we're a data science company. We leverage machine learning. We analyze audio files. Chief, so since you were a patrol officer back in 1993, crime, all it's done is trended lower for the past 25 years. I mean, crime stats are half of what they were, if not more, back in the mid 90s. And despite lower crime stats, public sentiment, police morale is low, police frustration is very high. What do you think is happening today?
Well, I think that police nationwide are under tremendous pressure to produce reductions in crime numbers. That's really the metric that a lot of times police departments are judged. So what happens a lot of times, there's been conversations regarding different type of policing practices, such as intelligence-led policing, things of that nature. But a lot of times that really just reverts back to saturation patrols. And I really think that random patrols get you random results. That's one thing. But then in addition to that, a lot of times police officers and police departments are called in to address crime in troubled neighborhoods. And so unfortunately, a lot of times those same neighborhoods are neighborhoods of color. And so what happens in the police's efforts to reduce crime, what happens to some level, I think that a lot of times the same members of the community that the police are going in to help through their efforts, a lot of times these same community members, they feel to some extent maybe re-victimized by police, because when police go in and conduct saturation patrols, what are they doing? They're going to go in, they're going to make a high level of traffic stops, pedestrian stops. And so a lot of times those interactions between the police and members of the community can be negative. And so that's problematic. And so the metric that police performance is evaluated a lot of times comes into conflict with police community interactions, and so you might have a reduction in crime or violent crime or whatever type of crime you're trying to suppress, but then also at the same time, while you're achieving those reductions, you're increasing negative sentiment towards police because of those types of interactions between police officers and members of the community. And it's really nobody's fault, but police officers are being thrust into some of these different neighborhoods and communities and told basically, hey, go out there, go, make stops, make preventive crime efforts, but then also at the same time, members of the community, you don't know who has good intentions or bad intentions. And so officers are stopping everybody. And so a lot of the same people who are advocating for police and increasing police presence, they actually, by the end of the process, if not handled appropriately, their perspective and their support of police may wane because they're feeling to some extent victimized by the police that are coming into their neighborhoods and communities. And so I really think that we need to strike a balance between continued reductions in crime, but then also another metric for performance that we need to be keenly aware of is police community interactions, and are they positive and are they negative? And so I really think that the technology that we're talking about today is an invaluable tool that'll move us in the right direction to look at that in the form of a metric to determine, are we truly not only being effective from the standpoint of crime reduction, but in addition to that, are we doing it in the right way where we're still able to maintain positive interactions with the community? And I think we all know, anybody that's on the line and watching, from police officers to academics or elected officials, know that you can't go out there and have every interaction be a positive interaction. But the thing of it is, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to distill those interactions and look at what we're doing right to make sure that that's something that is the norm. And then if we have areas where we have opportunities for improvement, identify them so that way we can work on them. And because ultimately, at the end of the day, when you talk about what's important, yes, reductions in crime numbers are important. They're important to the community. They're important to police departments and organizations. But if the community that the police officers are working in feel victimized by the police officers, well, then really we've lost. And so I think that that's important from the aspect of a performance measure that we need to be looking at. And everybody has a stake in this, from community members, from chiefs of police, leadership within police departments and elected officials, academics. Everybody needs to have a stake in this, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about providing the right environment for our community members where they feel safe, but then also to make sure that when they look at their police department, that they feel respected and that officers are out there doing their job in a way that is honoring them as individuals and as members of our community.
Got it, Chief. Chief, it sounds like you're saying, if you optimize the department to drive down crime stats, and that is the incentive, then that is the result you'll get at, unfortunately, whatever cost. And if you want different incentives, like improving relations with the public, then those incentives, those goals need to be put in place. Is that an accurate summarization?
Yeah, and AT, I think that's right on. And, but a lot of times what you see is when you have these reduction in crime numbers, there's an increase in complaints against officers that accompany those reductions. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but how many people feel like they had a negative interaction between a police officer, but don't bother to make the complaint, but then their reality of what the police department in their community is permanently changed forever, and potentially in a negative way.
Chief, one of the I have a bunch of Pew Research stats up here on the slide, and one of the things that struck me are these three stats here. Because when I think about defunding the police and the public outcry to remove budget from the departments, these three stats jumped out at me the most. And the first one is that 81% of police officers say they're mistreated by the media. Do you agree with that stat? And if so, why do you think that's happening?
I'm surprised that number actually isn't higher. And I think police officers feel that way because officers can do a million things right. And you look at, like, for example, City of San Antonio, you have well over a million interactions between police officers and members of the community. And those day-to-day positive interactions, nobody says anything about them. And it's just the norm, day in, day out. But you have one officer that makes a comment that maybe is perceived as inappropriate, or maybe had to use force, and everybody's going to Monday morning quarterback that. And I think a lot of people don't understand that being a police officer at times can be violent in nature. And, it's a very small percentage, but it's those instances that are the ones that garner that media attention. And so what's ignored is all the fantastic work that police officers do throughout the country. And what is highlighted almost exclusively by members of the media is those negative interactions or those difficult moments And that is what's broadcast over and over again. But nobody talks about the police officers that are saving lives. Nobody talks about how police officers are doing things to make positive improvements within their community.
Yep.
Those things are totally not discussed, but the only thing that's focused on is those sensationalized incidents of negative interactions between police officers and members of the community.
Yep. The next stat, Chief, on the bottom left here, some officers say tough, aggressive tactics are needed with some people in some neighborhoods, and there's no consensus here. This is a poll within police officers, and you've got, 55% disagree, 44% agree. Even within the ranks of police officers, there's really not any agreement, some consensus around what are the tactics needed. Thought that was interesting. And then finally over on the right hand side, really like this is how I would explain what's happening to maybe like a young child or somebody that was asking me why do people want to defund the police? This stat really jumped out. You've got officers who believe that these are isolated incidents, and you've got the public that believes it's signs of a broader problem. And I'm just wondering, what's your reaction to that data there?
Well, I definitely think it shows some polarization between police officers and members of the community. But I think that it is really a much bigger issue than police officers and members of the community. It's I think there's a lot of these issues that are tied to socioeconomic issues that, quite frankly, a lot of people just completely bury their head in the sand and ignore. And I think that those are the things that have to be addressed, in addition to looking at how we're policing within our different communities. And there really needs to be a holistic view of how we're going to try to problem solve within our different communities and not lay it all at the feet of police. Because you look at all the failures in our social services system, from homelessness to dealing people with mental illness, the police department generally is the backstop for all of that. It's laid at the feet of the police department in every single community for the most part, with very little support, very little training, and it puts police officers in a very, very difficult situation, because when all other systems fail, police cannot fail. And so that's why you have police online 24/7, 365. And so I think that is one of the difficulties that police departments are put in, police officers specifically are put in, because when everything else fails, police departments and police officers are still expected to come up with the solution and address community issues.
Thanks, Chief. When I look at all three of these stats here, I think, like, where's the data? What does the data say? You mentioned that like 99% of police officer interactions are positive, and that those should be on display. And those exist in the body-worn camera. I know we're going to get into this and talk about this in a minute. And then the officers not having consensus around, like, what are the tactics that work or that they should be deploying. To me, that's a red flag, and tells me like that we need to be talking about, what does the data say? What's happening with inside the cameras? What does good policing look like? Who's an officer that's got great de-escalation skills? What are they doing, and how do we replicate that officer? And then finally, the fatal police black encounters, are these isolated incidents? And if so, what does the data suggest and say? Why this is occurring and happening? So all of it, Chief, I think points to the idea that we need more data. We need technology to help unlock this data. So that just brings me into one of our first conversations, Chief, was around customer relationship analytics. And a lot of people don't know this, But if you search revenue intelligence or sales intelligence, you're going to get hundreds of companies that are popping up. This has been a huge growth area, I would say, starting in 2012, 2013, and now it's just exploded. And the big takeaway here is that, what our audience should understand is that there is a lot of money and a lot of time and attention spent on analyzing sales calls and customer relationship calls, how to retain and win customers. And what the data scientists found is that there are formulas for success, that being a good salesperson is not random, that these guys have structured calls, they say certain words and do certain things. And this is the business that GreenKey is in. And this is just a very general slide, not just about GreenKey, but about what is happening in the industry. And just some examples are that we know from listening to calls is that the talk to listen ratio impacts win rates, and that the ideal salesperson talks less than his customer. So we've got this number 4357. A lot of salespeople are lopsided 70-30. They talk a lot. Another very quickly is like when pricing's discussed. If a customer doesn't ask about pricing, you're not going to win a deal. If it's asked once or twice, it's not enough. But more than 4 times, now pricing is an issue, and now that win rate is likely to decline. There are literally hundreds of examples now where companies are analyzing millions of calls with salespeople and support people and pulling out best practice. And just some examples are things like what GreenKey does is we analyze percentage of social interaction. We analyze percentage of analysis where a customer's asking you a question. And so we've looked at the formulas, and we go to our customers and we tell them why a good performer is a good performer. There's no mystery. There is a formula to their success, and it can be replicated. Good salespeople say you. They say things like top award, highest rated, we're the most trusted. They say the words because, imagine, for example. They say a lot of as you can see. They're very visual. And so the idea here is that AI is taking the guesswork out of sales call effectiveness. Can we apply the same type of technology and start looking at body camera audio to figure out, are there insights that police can use? That brings me to my next slide here, Chief. Chief, if you could unlock body camera data, what are some of the types of insights that you think would be helpful for police officers to use?
I think that one of the most important things that an officer needs to really develop their skill set on is de-escalation. And so I think the body camera analysis, when it's done correctly and appropriately, what it could do within different communities is find out, okay, so which officers are your most effective officers and what makes them effective. And so that is a translatable skill that you can share with other officers that are working within your department. So if there shouldn't be that top 10%, what you want to do is you want to expand that strength within your organization, so that way you have more officers performing at that higher level. And I think that this is important because the police officer out there on the street, they're the police officers that are performing people's reality. One of the things that I used to talk to my officers about was the difference between perspective or perception and reality. And so people's perception of a police department may be X, may be positive, it may be whatever the case may be, based upon whatever they see on the news media. In City of San Antonio, Chief McManus does a really good job of getting out in front of the news media and messaging things that are going to put the police department in the most positive light. But one of the things that I talk to police officers about is their role in forming people's reality. And so what is more important? Is it perception or reality? And to an officer, everybody agrees it's reality. And so we need to make sure that we're equipping our officers with the widest variety of tools available, so that way when they're forming that reality with that member of the community, it's going to be positive. And so again, perception is important, but the most important thing, the lasting thing, is going to be people's reality, and that reality is formed based upon that police officer interaction with that member of the community. And so the body camera audio analytics is going to be an important piece of that, to make sure that our officers are going down the right path in those interactions between the officer and that member of the community.
Chief, is there a change in behavior by the public when somebody knows that, hey, I'm an officer, I just turn on my camera? Does the public change their behavior or their perception of the officer at that point?
Oh, absolutely. And I've said it before that body cameras don't only change officers' perspectives or interactions, but the behavior of the community member changes as well. I mean, I've heard countless times when officers have rolled up on a call, and that member of the community will ask them, "Is that a body camera? And is it on?" And police officer tells them yes. And the demeanor of those individuals changes completely. And so it changes behavior on both sides of the lens. And so I think that that's something that we need to understand when we're looking at analytics, to understand that the camera changes behavior, but also at the same time, how can we leverage that in a way that's going to be a benefit to the police officer that's out there working?
Chief, when you were at San Antonio, how much audio did you guys analyze, and what was that process like? And why would you analyze the?
Well, supervisors were responsible to do an audit on every single officer under their supervision on a quarterly basis. And so they're analyzing one interaction on a quarterly basis. And so that interaction is a relatively small segment of the officer's work and what they're doing. And so the concern is that, and I think that the amount of body camera footage that is being collected is voluminous, but are we truly effectively auditing that body camera audio and video that's being recorded? And I think that that's a gap in what we're doing. But also at the same time, it's very time intensive. You can't have somebody look at this data hour by hour, minute by minute, because it is just a bear. And so you need to figure out the best way to manage it. And I think NLP technology is definitely a step in the right direction, because it's looking at it from the perspective of analytics and trying to look at what we can do to better monitor our officers and what they're doing right, and what are some of our areas where we can see improvements.
Chief, we talked about like less than 1% of this audio ever gets reviewed. If it is reviewed, it's by humans. Typically it's somebody's brought an incident to their commander or to you, and so there's just not been an automated process in the past. And you mentioned that one of the things you're most interested in is understanding like what de-escalation techniques work. And why do you want that information? My assumption is you want to try to replicate somebody who's demonstrating good de-escalation techniques. Maybe you can explain to us, like, what are some examples of some good de-escalation techniques? And have you had any success in replicating those across some of your other officers, and how did that happen?
Well, I think that every chief of police, every manager, every leader within every police organization knows that when you have a call for service, there's probably a handful of officers that you want to have showing up at your doorstep, or you want to have showing up at your accident out on the roadway. And so everybody knows those officers, who they are within their organizations. Any chief of police that's worth their salt is going to know the officers. And a lot of times they'll put them in community services units within police organizations if they have the ability to do that. And the struggle with that is that you want to replicate that officer and the way that they interact with members of the community, but how do you distill that? And I used that term distilled earlier, but I'll use it again, because what you want to do is, from the perspective of a manager or a leader, is you want to be able to provide that information to the other officers, so that way when they're going through their annual in-service training or a roll call briefing or whatever the case may be, however that information is shared, that you're giving officers pinpoint examples of what we need to be doing from the perspective of what right looks like. And if it doesn't, then what do we need to do to improve that? And so a lot of things, like from the perspective of the way I learn, is I learn by actual practical application. And so if we can demonstrate that practical application to officers, so that way they can emulate that, that's what we want, because ultimately at the end, we want to have a win-win when it comes to interactions with police officers and members of the community. And one of the things that I talk to police officers about during our in-service is, I understand that not every situation is going to be the same. I'm not saying that you need to be utilizing these tactics when you're rolling up on a hot scene and people are shooting, but that is the few and far between type calls. What we want to do is we want to look at and focus on those 98% of the calls that really it's about having verbal conversations with people and de-escalating things and helping people solve their problems. Because in people's darkest moments, that's when the police are going to get called. And so it's in those darkest moments that we as police organizations need to be at our very best, because we're there to protect and serve, but also at the same time, we have to understand that it's really about service to the community, but we want to make sure that we're doing it in the right way.
Chief, on one of our first slides, you talked about how crime stats, lowering crime stats at any cost might not be the best strategy for policing. And how would you use body-worn camera analytics to change sort of the incentive program at a police department? For example, can you imagine that de-escalation times or de-escalation win percentages, is that a likely metric that could be used by police departments? Have you thought about how you can incentivize more officers to de-escalate rather than to arrest or lock up or have some other outcome?
I think that it's a metric that, quite frankly, needs to be used, because again, the traditional metric of performance was the lowering of crime stats, but I can almost guarantee you, in a lot of instances, and I'm not saying every instance, but a lot of instances, these same communities where we saw reductions in crime, we also saw a lowered reality or perception of their police department. And so we need to strike a balance from the perspective of, not only do we want to reduce crime, but we want to make sure that those interactions with the police officers and the members of our community are as positive as possible. And I am not naive enough to tell you that every interaction is going to be positive, but we want to make sure that we're equipping our officers with the tools and the understanding that there's opportunities to de-escalate these types of calls. And I think that audio analytics and LP provides the opportunity to kind of package that together, so that way we can help officers in that learning process, because I can guarantee you that growth for officers, especially the first 5 years of their career, is tremendous. But if we can move that along to help that officer have a better understanding of different things that they can do, different techniques that they can utilize to de-escalate situations out in the field, it's going to be tremendous, not only from the perspective of the police officer from being able to de-escalate these situations, but then I think the community members are going to walk away from those interactions with police officers with a whole lot better perspective of their police officers and their police department and how they're working with them within the community.
Yeah, I think we would address those questions from our first slide. You know, like are these isolated events, and what does the data say? You know, are 99% of police interactions positive? And also give police departments, you know, the data sets to be able to highlight good police officers, be able to show, you know, what a successful interaction looks like. Just moving on here, Chief. You know, so the entrepreneur in me, you know, when we had looked at these use cases a couple of years ago, after we had started to analyze 911 call data, we became a Motorola portfolio company, and we got exposed into public safety. One of the first things I wanted to understand, like, why isn't this being done? This seems super obvious. What are the challenges? And actually, it has been done before, measuring the BWCs. This group in 2014 did it. A bunch of professors at Stanford University analyzed 981 audio files across 245 officers. And so a lot of the different types of labeling and classifications we're familiar with. And basically, they were trying to figure out if traffic stops were respectful or disrespectful across race, when they controlled for a black police officer or a white police officer, and they controlled for, you know, whatever the stop was. And they did find racial bias in this data. And so then I wondered, why hasn't this study, continued? And we learned how expensive and time-consuming analyzing all this audio data was. That took about 6 months just to, review some of this data. And just to kind of put that in perspective, 981 stops, it's about 10 minutes a stop. That's about 160 hours of body cam data. GreenKey can process that in a couple hours. So, that's just how far the technology has come since 2014. So what took a university or several universities 6 months to do, GreenKey could do that in a couple of hours. So, Chief, I'm wondering if you would describe to us, I know that you're, retired, but I was thinking about, if you were, starting out your career, your police career now, what do you think the future of body cam analytics looks like for you as a new police officer joining the force today? What would you expect to happen and to see over time?
I think that, and we've had this discussion, AT, that I think that body camera footage and the analytics performed on that body camera footage are going to be hand in hand. I don't think that we're going to be able to separate the two moving forward. And why do I think that that's going to be a trend that we're going to see in the future is because there is so much of a demand by the community and elected officials and city leadership for transparency from police departments and the way that departments and police officers are doing their job within the community. This is the perfect tool to satisfy that. And so it's voluminous. And what this really does, looking at it from the standpoint of an analytical formula and be able to cull through all that in a way that's effective and manageable, is just a game changer. And all the past body camera footage that really has just been shelved and nothing's been done with it, that should be a thing of the past. I think that every department, every organization needs to be looking at their body camera footage from the perspective of what are we doing right as an organization, and how can we utilize the footage that's being collected for the training environment that our officers operate within. So that way we can do a better job in those day-to-day interactions between members of the community and our police officers, because that's important. Crime reduction is important, but at the end of it all, if we have a community that distrusts their police officers or has a negative opinion of their police officers in the department, we're doing more damage than we're helping if we're not policing in the right way that meets the needs of our community.
Got it, Chief. You know, it reminds me of, I shared the story with you, you know, when we started out GreenKey in 2014, you know, we were just a young data science company in Chicago. We went to Wall Street and we said, we want to listen to your phone calls and tell you what, you know, your traders and other people are saying on these calls. And they were very suspect of GreenKey. And I had more than one Wall Street executive say, we do not want to know what's on those calls. We do not care. We don't want to create more problems for ourselves. We're not interested in airing our dirty laundry. And what happened was their attitude changed from, you know, a big brother oversight tool to a couple years into that, it became more of a workflow efficiency tool. And then once they realized they could make more money by using these tools, then usage really exploded. And I think if I were a police officer, I think it would be understandable to be hesitant and to say, you know, this is nothing but oversight. But I would challenge you to think of it in terms of understanding what tactics are actually working and what tactics actually improve sentiment. And we talked about that on the first slide, that there's no agreement or consensus within police departments around what tactics are actually effective. And so I would encourage, you know, our audience, who is half of them are police and half of them are elected officials or advocacy groups. I would encourage you guys to think about that data as being incredibly valuable, and it's just locked away right now. And the sooner you unlock it, the sooner you can make more data-driven decisions. Chief, just moving on here to our last slide before we get to the Q&A. I always like to leave officers, departments, elected officials with some stats around, like, well, what does this actually look like? To give you a sense, about 100 officers, actually, they're going to create about 2,800 hours of video. But GreenKey ignores silence and video. We only analyze conversation, audio. And so about 25% of an audio file is going to be valuable. So 100 officer department, you guys are creating about 700 hours of conversation per month. And you know, it's simple to get started. You just upload that data to AWS GovCloud and select GreenKey models. You can analyze that audio. We have a separate group of people that are model builders. And if you're interested in building a model, you should contact us as well, because a lot of these insights are local. You know, and so we're working with different crime labs and research and development teams and different universities and criminal justice programs, because they're building unique models that are unique to that particular city or town or that particular insight that they're looking for. So you can totally customize models and customize your reports. And so hopefully that gives you a good sense of how much data you have and what could be done with it. So Chief, if you don't mind, we've got about 10 minutes left here. We can answer some questions. Let me figure out how to work this technology. And Ethan, if you can hear me, I'm sorry, buddy, I've already forgotten how to use the Q&A chat piece. So if you've got questions, please just let us know what they are, because I can't see them.
Hey, Anthony, you're cutting in and out. I'm not sure if that's happening for others, but there are a few questions under the questions tab for some discussion.
Okay. Ethan, would you mind just reading out those questions for me, buddy? I can't get the little scroll down to work. Chief, I don't know if Ethan heard me or not. Ethan, if you wouldn't mind, Ethan, would you mind reading out a few questions?
I can read off the questions, AT, if you're okay with that. We've got 3 of them in the queue. So now we got 4. So the first question is, what is the most effective form of training to improve police community interactions? And so from my perspective, I think one of the things that we did with SAPD is we did some training on recognizing bias, and we want to make sure that officers are aware that we all have some form of bias, and so that's an important element to the training that needs to be conducted with officers. But then I think that officers need to understand how important their role is within the community. So it's not only up to the chief of police and, let's say, a community services unit or command staff to have that mindset of they're responsible for positive PR with members of the community. Every police officer should look at every engagement that they have as an opportunity for positive interaction with a member of our community. And so you talked about Wall Street and the way that they looked at data analytics. And I think the currency for police departments needs to be their interactions with members of the community. That's our currency. That's what we live and die by. Mm-hmm. Because if we have a community that we're not alongside with and working with to police alongside with the community, then you have a community that feels that they're being policed by the police, and that's not the environment. And so I think you need to have some very candid conversations with officers and members of the community and understand that there is some form of racial bias with everybody. It's innate, it's human nature, but then also at the same time have that conversation. But I think you can use the data analytics to distill what are some of the best practices that officers are utilizing within our own individual communities that are effective in those interactions between police officers and members of our community.
Got it, Chief.
That's kind of my thoughts on that.
Chief, a few other questions were around, are people going to get the slides and the recordings? Yes, we will make that available, not only the video recording, but also the presentation slides. We'll get that out to everybody. But the next question, Chief, I see is, what is the overlap between officer safety and de-escalation? I think that's a really interesting question. By choosing or going the de-escalation route, are we decreasing officer safety?
No, and I think it's exactly the opposite. Because I think if we're teaching officer de-escalation techniques, we're going to create a safer environment for officers. What we don't want is officers, by all means, to not utilize tactics, but we want to be able to teach officers what are some of the different techniques that they can utilize to bring down some of those highly filled, tension-filled situations that could potentially be volatile, but also at the same time, if we're giving them the tools to be able to bring down the temperature of the room, so to speak, then we're going to have less instances of use of force on the part of the officer and that member of the community that they're interacting with. And so, like the example that I gave, by all means, are we going to tell officers that they need to be utilizing de-escalation techniques if somebody's shooting at them, or if somebody's displaying some type of violence toward the officer? But what we can do is de-escalation, we can keep it from ever getting to that point if it's addressed properly. And then also, what we want to make sure is that when the officer walks away from that situation, that call for service, that we're improving that individual's perspective of their police department, their police officers, because if they're having a high volume of interactions with police, we want to make sure that when a police officer shows up, that they're not automatically going to assume that things are going to go bad and that they're going to have to resort to some type of violence towards an officer. And so ultimately, if we're utilizing the analytical data to improve upon how our officers are interacting with members of the community in a way, shape, form, or fashion that's going to help de-escalate these situations, I think it's going to create a safer environment for everybody, not only the police officers, but that member of the community that we're interacting with.
Chief, we have a question. This person says that, law enforcement officers, you guys take on the role as a case manager, therapist, a protector. What is the most effective training that elected officials can support for trauma-informed and mental health?
Well, there is a lot of training that's out there that deals with crisis intervention training for officers that's really effective. We've got a fantastic program here in San Antonio, and as a matter of fact, as an assistant chief, I went through that training because I wanted to see how we're training our officers in the way that that's being done. And I think that is a tremendous tool because it is really breaking down for officers how to communicate with people that are maybe homeless, for example, or they're suffering from some form of mental illness, and help officers to understand that, okay, if somebody suffers from autism, what you don't want to do is you don't want to raise your voice. You don't want to do things like that or show a force, because really it is causing them to go to like fight or flight, for example. And so what you want to do is that crisis intervention training, that CIT training, is fantastic. And I think every single police officer should go through that type of training because it is highly effective. And not only managing those types of calls with people that suffer from mental illness, but it also is helpful when officers interact with members of the community and just day-to-day calls for service. So it really helps round out officers in the way that they interact with members of the community.
Chief, just the last question here. I think it's around maybe like compliance or security, but the question is, how do you get union buy-in for audio audits? Do you run audits quarterly, or was it all the time? And just I just want to add some of my thinking to this, Chief, just to give you a second to breathe. GreenKey, we engage with elected officials directly. We're going to be announcing a partnership with Amazon in the next couple of weeks. Amazon's been an awesome partner because in order to solve this problem, like we need like infrastructure players like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon to do their part and give departments and cities credits and try to get the infrastructure cost down as low as possible, because you are moving videos around. And so a lot of people are very supportive of this use case. And the reason why we sell directly to elected officials is we feel like, that for us, they've been the best champions and sponsors to move quickly. And I've spent a lot of time talking with Chief about this. If you first engage the police department without civil oversight committees, without elected official support, then we could get blocked by unions and by the nervousness of like, hey, we're going to unlock all this data. What are we going to find? So we've run into that situation, and so we deal directly with elected officials. And what I've seen is that elected officials will move mountains for this data. So if you're a chief of police or at the department and you're worried about, your union, I would say make sure your mayor's involved. But so Chief, that's my analysis. What do you think?
Well, and I think, so going back to the question, is union buy-in. I think that I think you really highlight the training aspect of it, because really we're trying to create a safer workplace environment for our officers. It's not, I think everybody just directly goes right after that and says, oh, well, you're looking at how officers are going out there and answering these calls for service. But what is the value in that? Well, the value in that is, what we want to do is we want to highlight performance, the fantastic performance of officers and what we're doing right. And we want to make sure that we're ingesting that organizationally and we're rolling that into our training, so that we're creating a safer workplace environment for all of our officers. And so it's not like a gotcha audit. It's an audit to make sure that, one, that we're following the right path as far as police community interactions, but then also it's a way of measuring our performance that's not solely crime driven regarding numbers. And so you have officers, police officers, that maybe aren't out there beating the bushes and looking for criminals, but they do a fantastic job of police community interactions, police community relationships. But those types of performances up to this point really have not really received any credit. And so I think by looking at it from the analytical standpoint and looking at those interactions, if we can find some of our performers that are doing a fantastic job, maybe they're not out there writing the most traffic tickets or doing things like that, but if they have a fantastic way of handling those day-to-day interactions with members of the community, well, that's something that we can highlight and celebrate organizationally in a way that I think that the unions would appreciate, that, hey, we're not only focused on crime numbers, we're also focused on those officers that are doing a fantastic job, and how do we highlight those successes on a daily basis. That is part of the narrative that I think that needs to be had with unions and police unions.
Chief, we're going to conclude there. We're up on time. I just want to thank you again for your time and your analysis and your expertise, and thanks for joining me. And I hope it was entertaining and educational for our audience. Like I mentioned before, all of the material will be sent out in email. It's available on our website probably within the next couple of days. And we appreciate you joining and learning more about GreenKey's police body camera audio analysis. Thanks, everyone. Take care.